Hello, everyone. This is Sam Mallikarjunan from HubSpot. Again, I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it last time we had our scheduled event, but I wanted to take some time to walk you through some of what I was going to talk about during that time anyways. The working title for this is How to Survive the Future. Now, I usually give this talk to startups, teaching them how to disrupt and create opportunities in businesses where there are, or in industries where there are existing large businesses. But sometimes I also give it to existing large businesses so that they can learn how their enemy thinks. Most notably, I recently gave a similar talk, although I've made some additions here, to a group of people in Miami who represent the largest limousine companies in the world. Obviously, one of their primary fears are companies like Uber, especially in terms of business and executive transportation. And helping them understand how those companies think, how they go from what we call a startup to a scale-up and then continuous disruption, how that process works and how we think about that. So that's the same thing I'm going to talk with you about today. This is definitely one of the most interesting periods in the history of commerce. And we talk about interesting, right? It's a blessing. May you live in interesting times, but it's also an ancient curse. So there was another group that lived in interesting times called the dinosaurs. Now the dinosaurs, we tend to use this as a sort of an insult, right? That company was a dinosaur, that person was a dinosaur. But I assure you that none of us here could go toe-to-toe with whatever this dinosaur is and survive. The reason that we were able to survive and thrive is because we had roots that were far more adaptable to changes, rapid changes in the environment than dinosaurs were. Dinosaurs were big, they were tough, they were absolutely the apex of the food chain. But because they weren't adaptable to rapid change, they weren't able to survive. And we saw a mass extinction. We're seeing a similar phenomenon now. We're seeing a mass extinction of businesses. So the Fortune 500 list in the United States, obviously the 500 largest companies that we have, is something that used to define who you were. You were a Fortune 500 CEO, you were a Fortune 500 company. And the lifespan of a company on that list used to be about 75 years. That has since declined to just about 15 years. And we expect, based on research, that when we do this study again, that it may only be about 5 years. 5 years until a company that was a bedrock of the global economy is at least off the list, if not entirely gone. Now, this is horrifying if you're already on the list, but it's very exciting if you're not. So these 375 slots on the Fortune 500 are up for grabs. If you're on the Fortune 500, you're facing competition more significant than you ever have before. But if you're not on the Fortune 500, you have a greater opportunity to land amongst that group than ever before as well. This old idea that we would wait for companies to be successful and then we would just buy them, that idea is dead/dying, right? That used to be the strategy of a superior capital position. You would maybe do some light investments or whatever, but you just waited until somebody tested out a market, tested out a new product, and then if they were successful, you would use the fact that you just have a lot of money and you would acquire them, you would buy them. That doesn't work anymore. You can no longer just buy your industry's Uber, you have to be your industry's Uber. So Uber, right, the taxi companies and limousine companies, billions of dollars, could have bought Uber when Uber was small. Or they could have created the same solution that Uber did initially. Uber's initial technology was not impressive in any significant way. It was a little map with a GPS and some contacts exchange and some billing. There's nothing mind-blowingly technical about it. But by the time the cab companies and the taxi companies and the limousine companies and the other transportation companies realized they should buy Uber, Uber already had a market cap greater than that of the entire American transportation industry, from the taxis, cabs, and limousine companies. So it happens too fast. That rapid pace of disruption, that 5 years, is too fast to follow that M&A cycle. So you have to think in terms of how startups work, how they're coming after you, and if you want to stay ahead of them. And you might say, okay, this is the common pushback that I get, is that Uber is cheap. And that's why people use it. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I'll go ahead and get it out of the way here. I use Uber a lot, right? 925 rides. I've spent 10 days in Ubers. I only wait about 6 minutes on average. I go about 5 miles on average, right? Spend a lot of time in Ubers. And you can say Ubers are cheap, except for the fact that I don't usually pay for my Ubers because I'm usually either speaking at an event or traveling for work. But let's just assume that that's why, that people are actually using Uber just because it's cheaper. You add up all of these people, so this particular website, hundreds of thousands of people who are using these companies, and you end up with a really large, really interesting business. Especially as we are successful and we're drawn upwards in the market, we tend to ignore and look down upon a little bit the low end of whatever market it is in which we operate. That is very, very often a mistake, and on occasion, a very fatal mistake. So you may have heard the framework of disruptive innovation. It is probably the most commonly misused term in business today. Disruptive innovation is not typically about price competition. The dollar menu is not a disruptive innovation, right? Because anybody else can roll out a dollar menu as well. It's more of a marketing push, a pricing schema. But disruptions almost always start at the low end of a market, because as incumbents are adding these what they call sustaining innovations, they're chasing more valuable customers, larger contracts, etc. They're over-serving the low end of the market. The low end of the market simply does not need that amount of functionality. And that creates an opportunity for somebody to come in with a solution that better serves the low end of the market and brings in previously non-participating consumers. So the town car service, right, that transfers people from airport to hotel to office, etc., the folks I was speaking to in Miami, I had never really taken town cars. I'd always taken cabs or mass transit or whatever. I was a previously non-participating consumer. And Uber managed to bring me into that market by using their original Uber program, which is now Uber Black, which used those town cars, so I wasn't paying for time when I wasn't using them. That's one of the frustrating things about limousines and a lot of car services is you pay for their wait time as well, because there's no way to match them with somebody else, something that they can be doing. So even though it started at the low end of the market, there's now these very large disruptions that are happening throughout that industry. However, that is assuming that the reason people use Uber is because Uber is cheap. So I did a survey asking that exact question. Assuming that all costs were the same, which method of transportation do you prefer? Now, the vast majority of people prefer to own their own vehicle. This survey was done in the United States. That's a very common answer here. But the interesting thing is private car service lost by outside of the margin of error to Uber and other ride-sharing apps. People, if it cost the same, they would still rather use Uber or another ride-sharing app than use a private car service. So it's not the price, at least not for all customers. Some customers are absolutely price sensitive, but for some it's not. So what is it about? Well, I'll tell you about for me. One of the reasons I love to use it is because it integrates with my calendar. I don't have to know where I'm at. I don't have to know where I'm going because I travel so much, especially traveling internationally. That's very useful for me. I can land in Tel Aviv and I don't even have to speak the language, right? I can, it reads my calendar and tells me where to go and it integrates automatically and I can just click go. So the convenience there is useful for me. It also integrates directly with my business accounts. So I use this for personal accounts and I also use this for work and it's seamless. I don't have to file an expense report. I don't have to do anything. I just click one button and all of the information goes to my company. It's so, so easy to use. But if I want to use it in my personal life, which I often do, I click one button and it goes that way. And then again, as I said, lost in translation. When I'm traveling overseas, if I don't necessarily speak the local language at a level where the local drivers can understand me, I don't have to, because again, it's read my calendar. It knows where I am. It knows where I'm going, and it can help me overcome some of those language barriers, which makes international travel much, much easier and much less frustrating. So from my perspective, at least, my primary concern is not that it's cheap, it's that it's easy. It's that they figured out all of the things that were really terrible about ground-based transportation, and they got rid of a lot of them. And they made some things worse, right? For example, insurance. Not all Ubers have insurance. Maybe there's all these issues around that. Turns out a lot of customers don't care about that. Sometimes the things you were optimizing for that you thought were your competitive advantages aren't actually the things that customers care about. If I get into an Uber accident, I have health insurance. We'll figure it out, right? It's not my main concern when deciding what to use. So this brings us to phase one, which is a process that we call in startups finding product market fit, which is fairly self-explanatory. Is there a market fit for the product that you have or are designing? But the process to go through that is a little bit difficult. So you may have heard, hashtag retail apocalypse 2017, 2018. All of these stores are closing, especially here in the US. Toys R Us is declaring bankruptcy. Lots and lots of these stores are failing. They're having a very, very hard time adapting, especially in competing against the world of e-commerce. Now, this is a quote that I probably heard for the first time 10 or 15 years ago, and it has absolutely haunted me ever since. When what you're doing isn't working, you tend to do more of the same with greater intensity. Now, we see this a lot in sales, for example. If you're behind on quota, what do? You show up earlier, you make more phone calls, you leave for home later. But businesses tend to do the exact same thing. They have the same reflex. So all of these retail stores, their great innovation recently, these retail stores, has been self-checkout lanes. Now, I'm not sure if you've ever had the misfortune of using one of these machines, but it turns out the teenager on summer vacation is actually better at checking people out than most people are at checking themselves out. These things are frustrating to be stuck behind somebody on. It's a little bit irritating to figure out. But even if it wasn't worse, even if it was a better checkout experience, is that really necessarily what we care about? You look at the stores that are opening, that are growing, for example, Apple stores. Does that look anything like that? Is anybody trying to hard sell you, trying to reduce costs, trying to close you while you're at an Apple store? No. I went to an Apple store at a local mall here in Tampa where I live. It was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday. Every other store was deserted and the Apple store was packed. And it's because the goal of the Apple store is to give you a glimpse into what your life could be like if you owned an Apple product, and to help you make a decision, to help you learn about the products and decide what to buy, decide which of their products to buy. Now, Jeff Bezos, obviously the founder at Amazon.com, has probably my favorite quote on this. I'm going to paraphrase the story a little bit, but essentially, once he added negative reviews to the Amazon website, he got an angry letter from his investors saying basically, Jeff, you make money when you sell things. Why would you discourage anybody from buying things with negative reviews? To which Bezos replied, we don't make money when we sell things. We make money when we help people make purchase decisions. Henry Ford has the most famous quote in business on this, which is what we refer to as the jobs to be done framework. So Henry Ford's quote was, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Now, obviously, he didn't leave and found the Ford Horse Breeding Corporation. He founded the Ford Motor Company because he understood that the real job to be done was not riding a horse. It was mobility. It was getting from point A to point B as quickly, cost-effectively, and safely as possible. Turns out automobiles are better positioned to do that than riding an individual horse, even if it's a really, really fast horse. So this deep level of understanding of our customers is step one when we're trying to find a product market fit. And if you're not really good at this and doing this on an ongoing basis, you're going to find yourself getting disrupted. So Amazon, for example, makes a good amount of money, $258,732.88 per minute. And those are the 2016 numbers. I haven't updated them for the 2017 earnings calls. If you're not good at figuring this out, you're going to suffer the same fate that the limo and livery industries have against Uber. Amazon has an additional unfair advantage that helps drive that number, and that's called something called platform strategy. So Apple also uses this, Google uses this, companies like HubSpot use this, Oracle, etc., American Express. What platform strategy is it allows you to test out what your customers might like without you having to build it yourself. So there are hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of apps in the Google and Apple Play stores. Amazon has millions of products, and some of them, yes, are fulfilled by Amazon, but many, many, many of them are not. And in exchange for letting people sell on their platform, they take a fee, they take a small percentage of the fee, but then they also learn a lot about the user. They learn a lot about the customer. So Apple's revenues, are going to exceed $1 trillion in 2017. Need to check and make sure that this number actually was seen through, but they make tons and tons of money throughout the whole ecosystem. Not all of that, obviously, does Apple get, but the reason they're willing to do that, in addition to the marginal revenue, is because they learn. So Samsung is another good example of this, by the way. So Samsung makes $202 per Galaxy S8 that they sell, but they make $110 per iPhone X that they sell. And this is because their platform strategy is based around their intellectual property and their patents. So a lot of the technology that is used in the iPhone X is actually Samsung technology. So they make more than half the same amount of money. You can see this in Play Store examples like Pokemon Go. This is an embarrassing screenshot of my own order history from Pokemon Go. $99, $20, $20, $20. There was unfortunately more spent later. My wife and I really enjoyed playing it together. And every time somebody does this, every time somebody makes one of these orders, Apple and or Google is getting some of the profits. Now, what this allows you to do, in addition to getting some money from people who are selling on your platform, is it lets people test what we call the infinite long tail of use cases. What are things that matter to people? So this is a sample example from, for example, a CRM company, a customer relationship management company. And you have your core features, your email, your analytics, your contacts, etc. But then you have an app marketplace or a platform, or in Amazon's case, you allow third-party sellers onto your platform. And people build these apps, and that lets you see what actually matters to your users and to your most valuable users. So on the x-axis, you've got, in this case, 5, but an infinite number of things that you could be doing for your customers. And then on the y-axis, you've got the number of customers who are finding value from that. And the phrase being, the highest nail gets hammered down. In this case, the CRM company is probably going to build themselves a field routing tool and a marketing automation tool. Probably not going to do a budget analysis tool or a power dialer tool, because that's not something that's particularly useful to their companies. You'll see this a lot, especially in software companies, for example, Google, Apple, etc. But you'll also see it in retail companies like Amazon. So this is a fascinating quote, a moment of pure honesty from a former director at Amazon named Randy Miller, who was talking about how, particularly with jewelry, how if you don't know anything about the business, you launch it through the marketplace, bring in retailers, watch what they do, what they sell, understand it, and then you can get into it. So you're outsourcing the risk to somebody else while making some money, decent amount of money, in terms of the fees that you're taking for selling on your platform. But then the real value, the real unfair advantage of that is that you're learning an insane amount about your customers and especially your most valuable customers. So once you've defined that, you defined the jobs to be done, you've created this platform ecosystem to help you figure out on an ongoing basis what are the things that drive the most value to your customers. The next step is getting the math to work. So we use the phrase ROI a lot. You've probably heard of ROI, or return on investment. What that is it's a ratio for the cost of customer acquisition versus the customer lifetime value. So you can say you can put in $1 into a business model in Coca, right? And you get $2 out. It's a good business model. That's a 1-to-2 ratio. That's not bad. Or you can say I'm going to put $2 in and get $4 out. That's actually the same business model, but it can grow faster. Instead of spending $1 to acquire a customer, I can spend $2 to acquire a customer. Because instead of spending $2, or instead of getting $2 from my customers, I get $4 from my customers. Now, these may be the exact same businesses, but the second one, because it's better at nurturing that customer lifetime value, can grow faster. You can spend more on acquisition. Or if you want to go beyond a 1-to-2 ratio, you can say I want to spend $2 to get a customer and get $12 out. It's more profitable, but it means you may be leaving growth on the table. Now, this is a strategic decision that executives have to make on their own, which is how much of the pie am I willing to spend in order to acquire that customer? I could spend $6. If all three of these were the same business model, I could spend $6 to acquire a customer with a $12 value, have the same ratio as everybody else, but be able to dramatically outspend them. Better marketing, better sales, bigger budgets, bigger raises, more innovative teams to do all of that stuff, solely because the customer lifetime value side of the equation is more optimized. So a lot of times I'm speaking strictly to marketers. Marketers too often worry just about the awareness and acquisition phases of the funnel. Shifting your mindset from marketing to proper growth requires that holistic understanding of the business. We see this a lot of times with marketing professionals. If you want a raise as a marketing or sales professional, if you want a bigger budget, if you want to be able to invest in more innovative work, the right thing to do is probably to argue for investment elsewhere. In the customer success team, in the reviews and reviews marketing platforms, everything else that they're working on. Because you're already in a highly efficient market when it comes to awareness and acquisition. And the real leverage a lot of times is referral, revenue, retention, and activation. So I encourage you to flip the funnel when you're thinking about this. Especially marketing professionals, we start at the top and work our way from back. We now, as modern marketers, we start at the customer and work our way back. This then tells us what we can and cannot do from a marketing perspective. So if my lifetime value is $1,200 and I've made the strategic decision that I want a ratio of 1-to-3, that's easy math. I can spend $400 to acquire a customer. And if I know that I turn 10% of my leads into customers, also easy math, my cost of lead acquisition, or COLA, can be up to $40. And if I know that I turn 2% or 5% of my visits into leads, that's also easy math. That means that I can spend $2 in my COVA, or my cost of visit acquisition. Or I can make one of these numbers better. Let's say, for example, that I move my visit to lead rate from 5% to 6% by investing in site personalization, or conversion rate optimization, or maybe reviews for my website that improve the conversion rate. That means that my cost of customer acquisition, just that 1% difference, has gone down to $333. Now, that either means that I can spend even more driving traffic to the site because I've made my funnel more efficient, or I can have a more profitable business. But the core lesson for you here, absolutely to remember, is that if you're good at keeping customers, you can spend more money to get customers. If you're struggling to compete in sales and marketing investments and you find yourself continuously in a price war, odds are the real leverage in your business is on the customer lifetime value side of the equation. So the next step is, how do you get the math to scale? Because obviously, as investors, we're not particularly interested in giving you $1 and having you give us $2 back, or $2 and having you give us $4 back. We want to give you $1 million and get $2 million back, or $2 million and get $6 million back. This is the real challenge once you've identified product market fit and gotten the math to work. How do you get it to scale? Now, we're dealing with scale in an era in which the sales and marketing professions are struggling more than ever. First of all, we have the issue that quite frankly, we've spent 10 years with really smart people working on optimizing sales and marketing. It's gotten hard. It used to be way, way easier, but now it is a brutal bloodbath of competition. The second problem is that getting to this point, we abused consumers to where they don't trust us anymore. The marketing and sales professions have the dubious distinction of being what I believe are the only legal professions where there is an entire industry dedicated to stopping us from doing our jobs. People make millions and millions of dollars just trying to stop sales and marketing professionals from doing their job. So in the US, people skip TV ads. Those are DVRs that they sell. People unsubscribe from email, or they use spam blockers. Like, for example, Gmail, one of its original value propositions was how good it was at blocking spam. Direct mail isn't opened, and 200 million people in the United States alone are on what we call the do not call list. You're not allowed to call them with an unsolicited phone call. And a lot of this comes from a trust problem. So this is a survey that we ask every year. Asks a simple question of who do you trust? And at the top, as you'd expect, are firefighters and doctors. Further down are baristas, people who serve coffee, and professional sports athletes. And then further down are politicians and lobbyists. And then below them are sales and marketing professionals. Now, this data is a tad old. It's from 2016. But the reason I like to use it is because if you've paid any attention to what was happening in the politics in 2016 in the United States, we lost to those people. Sales and marketing professionals lost to politicians and lobbyists in 2016 in terms of the level of trust, because we spent so much time abusing people's attention, making all of the conversation about us, all the marketing about us, and taking any opportunity to interrupt people's days and interrupt their lives. So instead, we're going to teach you a different framework that we call the inbound commerce framework. It starts in the relevance phase. How do I build a nice wide funnel of people to whom my product or service is relevant? This is where social media, content marketing, search engine optimization, a lot of these things come into play. Now, some of the people in this phase may take a long time before they buy your product. They may never buy your product. It does not necessarily mean that they have no value. They can be evangelists that sell on your behalf, or they can be people who improve your overall search and engagement profile. They're just hyper engaged with you on Facebook, for example, which tells the Facebook algorithm that you should be seen by more people. The reflex in this particular phase is to obsess over like website visitors and search engine rankings, and to do whatever it takes to get the quick, cheap, and easy win. There's a great article that I encourage you to read if you haven't yet, called Confessions of a Google Spammer, where a gentleman named Jeff was making, I think it was $50,000 a month just spamming Google. Not a bad business. Some of us might say that that was a good revenue flow. But the thing is there are some very smart people at Google. There's very smart people at Facebook and a lot of these other companies. And they're working hard to make it so that this doesn't work. Because if you make it so that all people see on Facebook or Google are spam and other things that they don't actually want to see, they don't actually deliver the value that they're looking for, people are going to stop using Google. And so because of that, whole teams of computer science and psychology PhDs are fighting against you to prevent you from getting those quick and easy wins that we tend to want to get. Now, you might be able to make it work in the short term, but you might end up getting flagged and blacklisted or punished, or it might just be a waste of time and money for you. The key is to be paying attention to what the actual user wants and whether or not you're creating value for them. So if you haven't gotten a phone call like this, you probably will at some point. We have a place reserved for you on page 1 of Google. Be very, very suspicious of anybody who's offering you quick wins, especially in the sales and marketing professions, the acquisition phases. That is a part of the business discipline that is getting exceptionally difficult, very, very hard, very competitive, and success there requires nothing less than an obsessive focus about creating value for the customers. Instead, focus on being the answers that are useful to people. This is a screenshot from a great tool called answerthepublic.com, where you can see the actual questions that people are asking about any given topic in search engines. So if you're trying to rank for the term healthy food, there's all of these different terms: healthy, eating healthy while going out, why are healthy foods good for you, why is healthy food so important, etc. How healthy food affects the body, all kinds of, you can see right here off the bat, if you're struggling on what kind of content do I create on my blog or my education-based websites for my awareness phase, and what kind of conversations do I start in social media, questions are the best place to start. Your job in this phase is to answer questions. You have to be the answer that you want to see on the search results page. And the reason that people ask questions is because it helps them make decisions. By the way, this was the result for when I Googled sassy Jeff Bezos picture, as he's sitting there reminding you that we make money when we help people make purchase decisions. So now further down the process, the decision gets even harder. What a lot of marketing professionals do at this point, maybe somebody downloaded an ebook or subscribed to your blog, you start spamming them 3 times a week with a coupon and calling that email marketing. Because what you care about is what's next in your process. In reality, even though we call it a buying cycle, we always illustrate it as a straight line, and it's not. People can move back and forth throughout the process. They can be ready to buy and learn something new that kicks them all the way back out to the research phase of the buying cycle, where they have to learn more information. Or they start doubting themselves, and it's not always about money. Coupons have their place, especially in the intent phase of the buying cycle. But your job is to figure out, are they in the intent phase of the buying cycle, or are they in the research phase? If they're in the research phase of the buying cycle and you're sending them coupons, your conversion rates are going to be very, very low. And more damagingly, you can take a customer who wasn't price sensitive and make them price sensitive. You're starting off the entire relationship by framing it from the perspective of cost, which can cause you to fail. You may have remember the former most interesting man in the world has a quote that I love, which is, to be interesting, you must first be interested. Now, this is a screenshot from my actual inbox of emails from Amazon. Again, big fan of Amazon. They make $258,000 a minute, but they have a big challenge. You'll notice that all of these emails are about them, right? It's all buy my product, buy it again, this is on sale, discounts, et cetera, et cetera. And they're sending me on occasion 3, sometimes 5 emails per day. Now, I want to introduce you to 2 people, pretty important to me, my grandparents in this case. Fascinating people. I try and talk to them when I can. They don't email me 3 to 5 times a day. If you're emailing me more often than my grandparents, who I don't get to see, you better have a really darn good reason to be doing it. If you don't, you need to think about, take a step back and think from a sales and marketing perspective. Are you actually creating value for the user, or are you going to create an incentive for them to actively seek, perhaps even pay, to block you from communicating with them? Now, the reason I love that interesting and interested quote is because if Amazon had bothered to ask, they would have noticed something kind of interesting in one of my products. So for the first time, I expressed an interest in a golf product. And it's not because I'm planning to hit the PGA Tour. It's because my girlfriend's parents at the time were big into golf. And I wanted to be able to spend enough time with them to not win. In fact, not winning is probably a good idea, right, when it's your in-laws. But I wanted to be just good enough that I didn't make them mad. Golf is one of those games where if you're very unskilled at it, you can slow everybody down and actually be very, very frustrating and irritating to everybody else on the course. I just wanted to get that good at it. Now that I've explained that to you, do you think that you could have written an email that sold me that item in a better way? Of course you could. Even further, now you know that, okay, spending time with my my future in-laws, my girlfriend's parents, is very, very important to me. You can sell me all kinds of other things, board games and books and conversation starters, bottles of bourbon, whatever, right, to help me spend time with my girlfriend's parents. By taking a moment to understand why somebody's doing something, you can dramatically increase your ability to effectively sell to them. So I did do a survey, by the way, testing Mr. Bezos' theory about Amazon.com. And while he is right that people that they make money when they help somebody make a decision, that is undoubtedly true. They're still doing a relatively poor job on that. Only 6% of the 1,000 people I surveyed in Q4 say that they shop on Amazon.com because Amazon.com helps them decide what to buy. So although that is where they make money, that's not right now Amazon's competitive advantage. In fact, that is still primarily the domain of micro brands and smaller e-commerce websites who are hyper-focused and can ask those questions and can create these customized marketing experiences that help you decide what to buy. So Amazon right now, it's easy to use, large number of products. Even price isn't necessarily that important to folks, but their core hypothesis that we make money when we help people make a purchase decision isn't something they're delivering on right now. All right, so you've gotten somebody to purchase something. Most sales and marketing professionals at this point will call it a day. We, however, know better than that. We know that the real leverage on most unit economics equations for businesses is on the customer lifetime value side, the repurchase phase and the retention phase. I'll use an example of this that I love, Pokemon Go. You saw the embarrassing screenshots of my purchase history earlier in the presentation. Pokemon Go is the fastest thing in history to reach 50 million users, right? So radio took 38 years, Facebook 3.5 years, Angry Birds 35 days. Pokemon Go took just 19 days to reach 50 million users. It's also the fastest game in history to make $1 billion. Nintendo gets, and I'm estimating here, but probably only about 10 cents on the dollar for every dollar that Pokemon Go makes in profit. And yet, Pokemon Go single-handedly helped them reverse a year's worth, an almost decades-long trend of declining revenues based on their ability to deliver large value. So it's difficult to say that Pokemon Go was not a successful application. But when you look at what we call the daily active users chart, what we find is that while they were really good at getting customers, they weren't very good at keeping customers. So there was a big spike, and then it pretty quickly started to decline. And they had about 3 months before it really got bad. But then since then, we've seen some slight bumps without much in terms of actual retention. Now, this matters because from an economics perspective, as we know from earlier, if you're not good at keeping customers, you can't spend more money to get customers. But it's also indicative of a lack of product market fit. So I apologize for what I'm about to do to your ears, but I promise I'll explain it. Product market fit is best defined as user cohort retention is asymptotic to the x-axis. Now, here's what that means. Product A and Product B both acquire the same number of users in April, let's say 100 users. And after a certain period of time, Product A has lost some of their users. You know, some move away, some die, right? There's any number of reasons that people might stop using a product. Product B, on the other hand, eventually loses all of their users. Eventually, none of the people who started during April of 2018 are still using Product B's product. Now, even though their sales velocity may look the same, their overall growth curves are going to look very, very different. So I'm a pretty good sales and marketing person. You're probably pretty good sales and marketing people. We can just go sell whatever a thing is, right? If we want to launch a startup, we just go sell faster than customers can cancel for a while. But eventually, we're going to reach the point where no matter how good we are at sales and marketing, we can't acquire new customers faster than existing customers can cancel. And this is where you end up with plateaus. So you can see on the left, the companies on the left and the right are acquiring the exact same number of new customers per month. But on the left, you see they plateau after a certain period of time because they're not good at keeping them around. On the right-hand side, they lose some customers, or on the good retention side, they lose some customers, but they never lose all of them, and it creates this nice, beautiful stacking effect that prevents them from plateauing. So if you found that your customer acquisition and growth is plateauing, yes, the answer may be you need to invest in more innovative marketing and sales. You may need to do content marketing, SEO. You may need to invest in applications to help you use customer reviews, these sorts of things. But odds are that there's more to it. Odds are that the answer probably lies in very poor customer retention. My favorite example of this is Starbucks. So Starbucks in the United States, global company, has an average order value of about $5.90. And from a traditional transactional model, we may think to ourselves, okay, that means we can spend $1, maybe $2 to sell this $5 or $6 sandwich and coffee and juice combo, right? But Starbucks has an average customer lifetime value of over $14,000. This is data from KISS metrics. So if you're a Starbucks marketer, you're not trying to spend $2 to sell $6 sandwich coffee combo. You're spending $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 to acquire and retain a $14,000 customer. So if you walk around a city and you wonder why there are so many Starbucks everywhere, or you go into one and you wonder why they have great Wi-Fi, comfortable couches, etc., it's because they're really good at keeping customers. All of those are acquisition expenses. They can spend more to get customers, having lots of store locations, for example, as long as they're really good at keeping customers. Core lesson to bring you back to: if you're really good at keeping customers, you can spend more money to get customers. So the next phase, and the most often ignored, even more often ignored than the retention phase, is the promotion phase. This is, in my opinion, the next true phase of acquisition and business growth. So inbound marketing was the big wave of the last 10 years. This is going to be the wave of the next 10 years. It's not my sales and marketing team can beat up your sales and marketing team. It's my community of empowered and motivated customer fans can obliterate your sales and marketing team. It's an unfair fight. But how do you actually do that? So the first step, when somebody says, I grow my business from word of mouth, there is a metric for that. It's called the Net Promoter Score. There are several, but Net Promoter Score happens to be the one that I prefer. And it asks a very simple, single question to customers. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend, in this case, HubSpot, to other people? Use 0, by the way, so that nobody confuses it thinking that 1 is the best and 10 is the worst. 0 is completely unlikely. 10 is the most likely. If somebody gives you a 0 through a 6, they're a detractor. Not only are they probably not going to recommend you, but they're probably going to actively encourage other people to not buy from you. If somebody's a 7 or an 8, they're passive. They're not really going to do anything in all likelihood. And if somebody's a 9 or a 10, they're a promoter. They're more likely to actually do stuff for you, to help promote your brand to others. Now, the interesting thing is when I get one of these surveys from a company, I'll generally give them a 0. I'm not worried about skewing their data because most of these companies are large enough that a single 0 is not going to mess anything up. What's really interesting to me is if anything happens next. If I click 0, and then, as happens in 9 times out of 10 cases, never hear anything back from the brand cannot possibly claim to be customer-centric. Right? If somebody gave you a 0, said that they were absolutely unlikely to recommend you to anyone else, and you didn't follow up, you may care about the data, you may care about the customers, plural, but you can't claim to care about the customer on an individual level. The inverse of that is if I give you a 9 or a 10, you don't do anything with that information, you're robbing yourself of a growth opportunity. So Moz has this great graphic that illustrates what we call commitment and consistency. So if you ask, for example, do you consider yourself a champion of human rights? And they say, yes, of course. Then you give them an opportunity to donate. They're way more likely to donate than if you just gave them an opportunity to donate right off the bat. Now, in consumer satisfaction surveys, where we ask people for a review, or we ask people for a rating, or we ask people for an NPS response, and then we don't do anything with that information, saying, listen, here are some people who have questions. Can you please go answer them? Here are some websites you could leave us reviews on. Can you please go do so? If you're not actively following up on that, you're robbing yourself of a valuable growth opportunity. Uber is another good example of this. Uber was banned in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It is the fastest I have ever seen government reverse one of its decisions, because countless people showed up to the Cambridge City Council meeting here screaming at the politicians, telling them that they had to unban Uber. And they had done it for a legitimate regulatory reason, because Uber wasn't billing the way that the law said that they should be billing. But their customers were so powerful, so enamored by the brands. They were so appreciative of the pain, the job to be done that they were hiring Uber to do, that they were willing to not just promote the brand, but to go to bat for it, to fight for that brand, because Uber focused on making that a priority. In what is one of my favorite quotes, one of the greatest quotes of irony I've seen, Mike Sullivan, one of the taxi lobbyists in Las Vegas, talked about how they spent all this money on lobbyists who, at least lobbyists are more trustworthy than marketers, right? They spent all this money on lobbyists, and then the lobbyists ended up caving to the power of consumers. You cannot fight the power of consumers, at least not for very long. So the top side of this equation is COCA, the cost of customer acquisition. The bottom side is the customer lifetime value. And keeping these in balance is the growth professional's role. So now beyond that, once you're doing well, you want to start to create your own next new disruptions. You're doing well. You're growing. Your math is scaling. Everything is going well. But you cannot rest on your laurels. IBM is my favorite example of this. So IBM in 1980 was the undoubted dominant king of the IT space, especially globally and in the United States. And it was a great quote by Rich Seidner, IBM programmer, where they found that it would take at least 9 months to ship an empty box at IBM, just based on the processes and approval and procedures and everything else that they had to adhere to. And because it was IBM, it would have to be a vertically integrated box, and they'd have to go buy some place that made cardboard in order to do it. Yet, in less than 1 year, IBM launched the IBM PC because they knew that a different job to be done was being served by the personal computer than was being served by the mainframes, which were the core of their market. And they knew that if they didn't try and disrupt themselves, that they were going to face wholesale disruption in the very near term. Now, that is an interesting story. But for me, what's far more interesting is the fact that they were so old, so entrenched in their procedures, and so successful. It was literally a cliche back in the 1980s that nobody gets fired for buying an IBM. You know, if you become IBM's customer, you'll never get fired. It's the safe choice. They're the market leader. It was very easy for them to rest on their laurels, but they didn't do that. They decided to compete with themselves instead. So when you start reaching that initial growth plateau between revenue and time, start thinking about ways in which that if you were going to beat your own company, how would you do that? How would you pull that off? Now balance this against one of the core dangers in everything that I've talked about so far, whether it's the marketing side, the sales side, or the innovation management side. And that's the distraction costs. There's an old TV show I love called MASH. Great character on it, Charles Winchester, has a wonderful quote. When somebody asked him, why do you get all the really challenging, really interesting surgeries, and why is he so successful? He says it's because I do it one thing at a time, I do it very well, and then I move on. Famous aphorism on this, right? Who chases two rabbits catches neither. The hardest thing to do in business leadership is not, when we're faced with $2 billion opportunities to go after one and the other, both at 80%. Because somebody else is going to go after one at 100% and the other at 100%, and they're going to beat us in isolation. It's to go 100% after one opportunity and completely ignore the other one. You have to do that in sales, you have to do it in marketing, and you have to do it anytime you're obsessed with the value that you're creating for customers. Now again, all of this comes down to understanding the math of our business and understanding the ways in which we help people make decisions. So I decided some time ago that I wanted to propose to the previously mentioned girlfriend. And while I know a lot about economics, I don't know very much about jewelry. Unfortunately, one of the companies that I had worked with before, that I had purchased from before, sent me the guy's guide to jewelry. And they asked me for some information, my first name, my email. They probably could have asked me for a lot more. They could have said, when are you planning to propose? What's keeping you from proposing? What fears do you have? Do you want to talk to somebody? Do you need ideas to propose? What's your budget range, etc.? They could have asked me all that, and I would have willingly given them that information because I knew that they would help use that information to help me make a better decision. And it's not just building your list, what they're doing here, right? You're creating what we call pipeline revenue. So let's say the ring costs $100 on average, and 1 out of every 10 people who download this ebook end up buying the ring. That's easy math, as we talked about earlier. That means that every time somebody downloads this ebook, that's $10 in what we call pipeline revenue. Now, my job as a marketer is to make sure that I'm covering the sales goals for the company, for the corporation. So you can see my e-commerce pipeline revenue graph here. The green line is my company's sales goal. The blue line is on a day-to-day basis. How good of a job am I doing at covering my sales team's goals in terms of future pipeline revenue? This isn't recognized revenue, but it's based on historical probability. Am I filling the sales team's pipeline? Am I covering their quota? Because if I can't do that, then I'm not doing my job as a growth and a marketing professional. And in case you're wondering, yes, I downloaded their ebook. Yes, they helped me make a decision. And yes, I bought from them. And yes, she said yes. So our wedding, picture from our wedding here in Tampa. So I'll leave you on one thought. I talked a lot about math and economics, frameworks and life cycles. All of the mathematics that we use is nothing more than the objective universal language that we use to describe the stories of groups of people and individuals. So this is a picture of a person who has the HubSpot sprocket tattooed on his knee as sort of like a rising sun thing over a tropical island. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of HubSpot, but we are a software company. This is weird that somebody might do this. Now, at the time, he was not in a position to make a decision about whether or not he was going to buy HubSpot at a company, right? The company he was at was already a HubSpot customer. But he was so grateful to HubSpot because we spent all of that time educating him, helping him find a job, helping him become successful at the job with all the content and everything else that we were doing, and our focus on creating tools and experiences and our academy certifications that help you do your job better. We spend so much time on that he is forever grateful. Now, do you think that when he is in a position in the future to determine what marketing solution his company buys, that we're going to have to worry about being top of mind? No, of course not. We're already top of knee. We don't need to be top of mind. With the value that we've created, do you think that we're going to end up arguing about price? Of course not. We live in an interesting period of history where, for a change, doing the right thing is also the best business decision. The best experience for consumers is also the most profitable and efficient growth economics paradigm. This is something that we haven't had in the world of business since the days of the very small corner-owned store where everybody had a very strong understanding of everybody else's reputation and there weren't a lot of other options. That was the last time we really had this kind of relationships with our customers. So the math is good and the feeling is good. So as long as you continue focusing on this, you're going to continue to grow. Thank you all. And I hope that you found that valuable and that you dig into defining your customers' jobs to be done, understanding their life cycle, and tailoring your growth and marketing to what they want to receive.